it's very easy to get you in the right room and sitting down and being nice and quiet. So thank you. I will leave the floor to Lars now, and of course Vivien.
Yes. Yes, I envision that it would be a kind of fruitful dialogue between us and not just the floor for me. But first of all, I will say thank you for giving us the possibility of reading your interesting study, which raises a lot of interesting questions and points at a lot of relevant issues for us to both for us to discuss and also for the e-learning community to engage in and go on in this area. We have been enjoying the discussions that it had been able to give us, and we have of course divided our discussion in some specific areas. It's not that I only will look at theory and Hanne will only look at method, but we will go into the different discussions from different perspectives or different angles. Maybe we'll take up some of the same things, but we'll have different engagements about it. What I would like to take up here in our discussion now is, first of all, something about the position as a researcher, as an action researcher. You raised a couple of notes about it already in the introduction. After that, going maybe a bit further on the three cases, and then something about the approach to the analysis of your different areas. That would be mainly the areas that I'm going to raise in our discussion. But first of all, as the position as an action researcher, you had this wonderful picture of the man working with the what's it, in the air condition from the outside. Yeah. I don't know if that was a feeling you sometimes had, but also the feeling I get from reading your different approaches is about, well, the action research process. You describe it as a joint learning process as co-researchers, you and the involved teachers. Yeah. So there's a kind of notion of being co-researcher between you and the teachers. So first of all, I would like to discuss something about, well, the different roles. As are you always a co-researcher evolving this? The field between being a scaffolder helping and a co-researcher doing joint research, and well, that could just be the point of departure from our discussion. If you could elaborate on some of the issues that had raised for you during the process.
Yeah, of course it's been, due to my position as also an e-learning consultant, I had this approach for working with this as, you know, helping them, scaffolding them, or facilitating, you could say as well, in the process of actually looking at what kind of technology could support the interactions or the activities, the learning activities that they wanted to set up. And I think that if I was looking at only trying to set this up, I would have the position as only being a kind of scaffolder. But because I also wanted to learn and wanted to reflect on what was actually going on, and it was part of my PhD process, I took on the position of actually also being trying to look at it in different perspectives and trying to invite the teacher to collaborate with me in the way of looking at the research as well. And sometimes it was kind of hard, I think, to divide between what kind of role do I have in this when I'm sitting here now doing the interview with the teacher. It would be like the researcher, but not doing co-research as such, but doing more getting data for my research. Mm-hmm. And when I was having the discussions and the dialogues with the teacher, and we were exchanging ideas and inspiring each other in ways of using this. The teacher often brought in ideas for what kind of activities and what kind of pedagogical values he wanted to bring into this. And I did the reflection on what kind of tools could be used for maybe supporting this. So in that perspective, I more saw it like this joint co-research project where we actually learned and gained and collaborating on making this happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, for some of the cases, I had different roles, I would say, because some of the teachers were actually quite well on technology in that way. So not much scaffolding in the use of the technology in that sense. Maybe more the co-researcher where we evaluated and exchanged what we were seeing from what happening during the lectures and in the online environment. More than some of the other teachers in the cases were lacking this technological knowledge and needed more scaffolding in actually doing this. And there I was more technical and even trying to set up the environment in different ways. Mm. So using many different roles in this action of research, I think.
Yeah. As I see it, as you tell it, there might be double roles for you as a researcher and a technical facilitator, scaffolder.
Yeah.
And also a double role for the teacher, being both a teacher wanting to develop the teaching and also engaging in the co-research part of it.
Yeah.
As you just described it now, it was as if when the teachers had like kind of sufficient technological knowledge, they could also go into the co-researcher role. I don't know if that was always the tension, but can you give some examples of how the teachers added to the researcher part of the development of ideas during the process?
Yeah, with one of the teachers, I had quite good discussions in actually these ethical issues that he actually brought up, because he had thought about this using his private Facebook profile for actually engaging with these students. Mm. And what kind of ethical issues would that bring into if he was leaving the university, for instance? And the data that was gathered in the Facebook group, what kind of, where would that go? Because if he was, intentionally leaving the university with a bad feeling of the university, how could he expose the students in this way of looking at the university? So having these kind of ethical discussions was quite gifted to me in my research to make me reflect on these kind of things. Okay. So that was at least one of the issues that I can come up with where it benefited quite well.
Yeah.
When you're asking about these different roles, of course, I probably used more time in scaffolding the teacher that also needed the technical part, and before we could evaluate on that and making her more co-research in the research that I'm doing, and at the same time I felt that she actually produced some quite good reflection on this about evaluation, because she actually felt that it was very hard to grab what the students did in writing when she was standing there in the lectures, and she hadn't thought of that beforehand. So in that way, I followed her lectures actually quite closely and sitting there, and we had the discussions after each lecture. So I was also following the teachers in different ways depending on what kind of scaffolding that I felt they were needed. Mm-hmm.
So there's two examples of actually the teachers developing some of the themes that you developed more. Yeah. As you describe it, as both kind of working as co-researchers, also as kind of co-learners, because you also had the challenge of going into the different domains that they were teaching inside.
Yeah.
We can go back to the question of domains later. Last thing about this position as an action researcher, about maybe especially in those cases where you are very involved technologically in how to develop the specific situations. What about the challenges about being so much kind of the creator of the learning environment and also have a look at it from the outside, the analytical perspective? Did you do specific things to support the outside perspective on it in your work? Or did you see it as a challenge?
That was a tough one. I think I can see what you mean, but I don't know if I see it as a challenge, because I think it took some time for me to actually realize the different roles that I had, because in the beginning, to me, it was quite blurred in that way. So it was not, because I had this, when I started implementing the Moodle environment, I had this strong feeling about I wanted to bring the teachers further than we actually did. Not just giving them a basic course in how to use Moodle, but actually I could see all the possibilities that was there with using this environment in different ways and trying to inspire the teachers in using it in different ways. Mm. So I probably already there had done some reflection on how could this be used in different ways. They choose to, some of them at least, choose to use Facebook instead. Mm. And I also have a Facebook profile, so I know the media, but not from an educational perspective. So I had to catch up with different things. So I don't think I saw it as such as a challenge, but when it came to me, the reflection about having these different roles in this, I had to look back and figure out where did I actually see myself in this.
Yeah. So it's also a thing that evolves over time, of course, in an action research process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's leave it at that. And then I would like to go on to discussing some of the, maybe not the specific 3 cases, but some of the issues relating to the 3 cases. One of the things I think is interesting is that you look at problem-based learning in relation to coursework and courses and how to design courses, where we usually discuss problem-based learning in relation to the project. So it's an important issue also to make PBL an integrated part of the courses. What I'm curious about is that, well, now all of the 3 cases were in the social science area, because that was the faculty where the development work took part. But what impact does the different domains or the different subject areas have in relation to other different needs? In a broad sense, you could say that working with social work or with chemistry might add very different needs to how to develop an e-learning environment. But also inside the social sciences, were there maybe differences between the 3 cases that depended on the different subject areas that they were inside?
I think that from the 3 domains or the 3 areas or cases that I looked at, even within these, there were different ways of actually coping or scoping the problem-based learning in the way that they actually set this up. And as one of my articles also illustrates, when I dug into how are they actually coping with problem-based learning and network learning in this, one of the cases, the one with the teacher actually giving the students the possibility to come up with critical questions and these kind of things, didn't really work with problem-based learning in the way she set up this learning environment. Mm. Even though that she might have an impression of doing it, but not not from my perspective, not in the sense of how you look at problem-based learning. So, and I know from for instance, engineering, that they have a different view on how to work with problem-based learning. I think that if you visit the different institutes here and looking at the coursework, now I only had the chance to look at 3 different, and they were very different in their way of approaching problem-based learning. And I think that will be how I can see it throughout the whole university, that they approach how to use PBL differently. And of course, there will be different ways of working with, you mentioned chemistry, for instance, because problem-based learning relates more to real-world problems. So you can look at these issues from different perspectives. I think that the case with the unlimited supervision was a case taking place for 5 weeks, and I actually have invited a company in to be part of this this activity that was going on, which means that the students actually within this had a very hard time on both doing surveys, learning how to do surveys, I might say, and they had to analyze them, and they had to cope with coming up with a business plan for promoting this e-medicine firm more than they were doing already. And so they were quite into my intention or my understanding of when you're dealing with problem-based learning. And one of my themes was problem-based learning or not, because I actually think that some of them didn't work with problem-based learning. Mm. He did, in the sense of actually having it more into the teacher-controlled part, because he was actually quite hard on framing what they were supposed to do in this. So I think there are different levels of problem-based learning when you're talking about it in a course setting instead of the project settings.
Yeah. And continuing from the different domains or subject areas, the challenge of the selection of the 3 cases, they were actually quite, as I understand it, selected by the teachers themselves, because you invited all of the social science teachers at the university. Some of them signed up for the workshop, or some of them attended the workshop, and from them there were the 3 cases actually being developed. Yeah. But what did that mean for you, for your kind of data, that it was those 3 specific teachers? Do you have an impression of, would it have been very otherwise, or are there some things you should add to it or subtract from it when kind of taking out a more broader perspective from the 3 cases?
I think I would have liked that I had more cases to work with, but it was voluntarily for participating, and I think that from my workshop we had quite good discussions in how to, in general, work with integrating Web 2.0 into teaching and learning. And of course, these 3 teachers that were signing up for further collaboration with me was the one that were quite engaged and actually wanted to, they were motivated to actually change their way of setting up their praxis in that sense. So that of course has an impact on how my data came out. Mm-hmm.
But looking at them in relation to your impression of the general group of teachers, besides them being more interested and engaged in trying to develop their teaching, did they have different positions, like kind of referring to different teacher positions, or were they very technology-wise, or the opposite?
Some of the other that participated in the workshop were quite, I think, as far as I know, from my knowledge as working in the IT department, I know that they are doing very interesting things in different ways, also using, for instance, the Moodle environment and looking at or activating the students in different ways. So I don't know if they actually thought that, you know, they already were in a process of doing what I wanted to scaffold them in doing. So that was the reason why they didn't sign up, but I actually just wanted to be at the workshop to get inspired and get new ideas and get the discussion with some of the others. Others, I think, were one of the other guys were actually, and I do remember them because there were not that many, but one of the other guys were actually invited to be part of this unlimited supervision case, but with another position. He was actually teaching the students to do the analysis on the data that they collected from the surveys. But he was invited to this joint and teacher collaboration because then there was visibility between the teachers and the students on what are the progress of the students and what do we actually teach them. So many different perspectives on I think why it was these three. Yeah. What I think was good at it was that they were in very different levels of technological knowledge. So it challenged me in the way of actually working with them in this scaffolding process.
So in that way, they represented different kinds of teaching approaches.
Yeah. And also,
in relation to
one
that.
of this case about using the block, for instance, she was very, you couldn't say limited, but she was very hush on only using the lectures. You know, everything was supposed to take part in the lectures, even though she was trying to integrate this online environment where you actually had this kind of 24/7 access. So I tried to push her or have a dialogue with her on actually trying to, could you think of the students actually using this from one lecture to another, and what kind of impact would that have? But she was quite, you know, she was framing very much that it was within the lectures. So coming to the workshop, in the end of her activity, it was having this 2-day workshop where she wanted the students to collaborate and gain a shared knowledge on these different theories. When then the students asked, can we get another week for actually adding to this environment, because they actually felt it was quite great for exam preparation for exam and these kind of things. Then she was a bit surprised, I would say, that they actually asked for that. So that was another thing I think was different in these three.
From the focus on the lectures to the focus on, and the challenge of being, what it means for the teaching and learning processes, and the 24/7 we'll sure discuss later also so today. But I would like to move on to the question of the method of analysis and your approach to doing that. When you collected all the different kinds of data and worked with the stuff, can you elaborate on some of the steps you took from all the different kinds of data to forming those categories and themes that what the process of finding out what would be the categories?
Yeah, the data collection took place over a very long time, in the sense of I was both I was having these meetings with the teachers, and from that I came up with some ideas in what to ask them for during the interviews. I also followed and discussed or had a dialogue with the teachers on what was going on in the online environment, what could I see as from the perspective of a researcher and me looking into it. So I tried to have, along the way, quite a long dialogue, or quite much dialogue with the teachers on this. And from that I gained some different perspectives. Of course, I also had my research questions in mind when I came up with this. So looking through my data, I was kind of trying to find the things that also fit with my research question in different ways. And then I did this matrix of actually trying to put in these categories and answering or looking at my research questions and trying to figure out how this was, how I was dealing with this. Because I actually, in the beginning, I probably just thought that I would look at the potentials in different ways. But I realized that there was lots of, every time you had a potential, you also had a challenge in different ways. So that's why they are listed opposite. You have to do different considerations when you're working with this.
I agree, and to learn from it, it's important not just to look at the potentials, but also at the tensions, the challenges that you can learn from.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, the first kind of categories or themes that you focus on, I think one of the challenges of naming some categories is from having them as kind of headlines to what are the actual point taken in that kind of category. You mentioned I think it's at page 80 of the thesis, that at some point you described that actual kind of leaving the categories or the themes and looking across them to find some, as you quote, I think you call it more some sort of interesting themes, kind of as if there was some steps taken from freeing yourself from the first categories to actually finding those that actually counted, which was, I think, the 9 that you listed here on the slides.
Yeah.
So can you say something about that process, the steps you took there from freeing yourself from them and finding some new?
Yeah. As said, I actually started out like having these categories based on my research question and what I have seen and what I would like to look into in these. And from that, I actually made this matrix of my data, trying to see if how they fed into these categories. But I soon realized that there was lots of things going on that could fit in more of the categories. So for that reason, I tried to look into how could I collect them differently? Could I put them together and bring another headline or another category for this? And even now, when I look at my data again, I see new opportunities in looking into this, in the way of like some of my examples today also put up with all of these different categories. Not only one, saying, okay, time as one category, but time and communication, for instance, and this spoken and written dialogue, how did that impact, and this also gives the time. So to me it was another way of trying to dig into these categories, and I believe that if I look at it again, I will get new categories as well.
It is a process of doing further iterations in the analysis on the whole way.
I have taken the focus of the teachers, and I've weighted the interviews that I had with the teachers. Of course, I also have some data from the surveys, and I mentioned them briefly in my thesis.
The surveys with the students.
With the students, for instance. And again, one of the things that come to my mind is this external scaffolding, where the teachers actually invite me to introduce 2 tools for him or for the students to adapt But what happens is that the students, I think only one in the class of 85 actually adopt it and says this is brilliant, but the rest don't have the time, they don't have the interest, they don't feel it's too hard, and these kind of things. So again, yeah, it was some other data, so my focus would be on the teachers.
Yeah, and that would add a whole other level to the study by including those kind of data.
Yeah.
I can see from my watch that half an hour is ticking very fast. So I will only conclude with the last question. From your work in the thesis, and you've done some literature review and studies of existing work. Well, now I'll just ask the final question. When I'm later this year going to write an article in the field of e-learning, and I'm going to cite some interesting new study, and what would be the main topic to cite you for?
I think, or what I've been speaking a lot about lately is the scaffolding model that actually came out of this, because I think that's quite essential in this, and I think it's an area of focus that we not put up very well to actually guide the teachers in doing this. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, I think scaffolding is a very central concept. You might discuss it further on with Hanne or Vivien, but yeah. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lars. And yes, who's next? Hanne?
You may find them on the scaffold. I prefer to have the headset like Madonna, but this is not today. Well, thank you for letting me be part of this committee. As you know, Lillian, this is really a topic of my favorite.
I know.
I've been doing a lot of those experiments myself, and I could have used a scaffolder on the way. I didn't have one, so I have failed plenty of times. But next time, I'll call you. But I would actually like you to tell me the progression of what?
The progression over time, I think.
Of time?
But you could also say, oh, no. Time was probably one of the issues. Another one will be the progression of, for instance, the first semester and the third semester and the fifth semester, and how do they progress over time in that sense. So that could be another way of looking at progression in this. I think that I also think that, of course, you could say, or it relates to when to take down the scaffolding as well. Where in the process are the teachers well knowledgeable on how to do this themselves? When are they doing that? One of the teachers actually called me afterwards saying, oh, there was this, how do I actually do this and this, and what was it that you were doing when you did this and this? And I was just explaining her on the phone, and I said, oh great, thanks, now I remember. And then that was another way of scaffolding her in just remembering how this was. So progress in that relation is also a way of talking about progress, I think.
When the way you have formed your whole project, you're very much interested in the teachers as the learners.
Yeah.
But I would argue that in order to have these kind of processes working, you actually need to look at many more people as being the learners. Like you also show here that there are two scaffolding processes going on. There's the one of the students, where the teacher is the scaffolder, and then the one of the teacher with you as the scaffolder.
Yeah.
So I would actually like you to comment a little bit about seeing this. For me, it's very much about having a new practice co-evolving. And it's a practice where the main actors is actually not you and the teacher, but actually the teacher and the students with you on the side. or that would be how I would picture it. So for me, that was a little bit surprising that you left out the students that much. I can see that, of course, you need to have a specific focus, but you're talking a lot about learning. So
Yeah.
what about the learning of the students? How can you not take that one in?
I had to choose, I think. But of course, there's a student's learning process going on as well. And that's probably where the two scaffolding processes overlap, because I think that's not that I'm just not part of it, but it's but from what you're saying is that's the dark gray area that you think would be the one that in the main focus. Of course, I'm not neglecting that the students have a learning process at all, but my focus was on the teachers, and I believe that the teachers was the domain experts in their field of knowledge. And of course I had to figure out what was the intentions that the teachers actually wanted the students to learn with the activities that they set up. So in that sense, I think it's all connected. So it's not that I just focus, but I think that what often happens is that we kind of neglect the process of the teachers actually having some time to prepare and having some time to actually think through what kind of intentions they have with the teaching and with the learning, that the activities that they set up.
So now you're talking about scaffolding as something going on very much in the beginning.
No, but I think that it's as this model also illustrates. I think there's a process where the scaffolding between the technology and pedagogical experts takes place before the students come on or get into it. But of course, it will be that the students are the main focus on what is actually happening, because the scaffolding that I do as a technical pedagogical expert needs to have an effect or an impact on the students and the work the teachers and the students are doing in collaboration.
I was just, because, I've been working with these kind of things, and I know a lot of you have also been working with trying to implement these kind of things in our teaching, and it's actually taking a lot of work, because you need to change the behavior of the students.
Yeah.
You need to change your own behavior. It's a lot of very deep-rooted norms that have to be changed. And when you're arguing that you have some of these examples where you see the students that doesn't enter in the theoretical discussions going on. So as a scaffolder and the expert helping the teacher, would you then recommend the teacher not to do this again? Or what would be the explanations? How should the teacher try to proceed, or should they just drop this kind of work?
No, he shouldn't drop the kind of work, but I think he needs to be very well aware, and what I tried was to make some awareness about that he actually needs to be more precise or really explicitly tell the students what he expected them to do. And at the same time, students, and I've seen this in many projects, actually have this expectations of the teacher as being the expert and the one that are moderating the dialogue and also telling what to do and what not to do, and have these expectations for the teacher as well, mm-hmm. which he needs or she needs to be very well aware. So I think that if the teacher wanted to have these theoretical methodology dialogues, then he needed to be more active and not just letting the students come up with the discussion points, but actually be the one that moderated them. So that will be another way. And then it will give the consideration of time. Did he have the time to actually do that when he set up this kind of activity?
My point would be a different one. My point would be that it takes time to actually develop those norms. So what you're arguing right now is that the expectation should have been better from the very beginning, or they should have set up the things differently. But I would argue that maybe it's a matter of actually having more learning cycles going on, that implementation actually takes a lot of time. And maybe you need to actually, as part of your scaffolding, maybe you should, or we should open up and accept that changing such very deep-rooted ways of doing things is not done overnight or over a course, but that you need to come back.
Yeah.
Meaning like you need to train students and the teacher to actually do these things again and again, because it's really difficult. I had a number of students who were very angry on the way, but afterwards they said it was really great, and next time they could maybe do it even better.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
But I agree with you on that. It's an iteration that doesn't, just come overnight or in one course. You as a teacher also need to figure out how can you support the students in this and scaffold the students in actually learning in this process.
Yeah.
But I still believe that you need to be explicitly
yeah.
knowledgeable about what are the intentions with this.
But seeing these things happening, would you then develop your own skills in scaffolding by being more, giving different guidance on, well, if you need to do these big changes, you need to be much harder on your expectation management? Or, I could see that maybe you also have a learning process going on.
Yeah.
All the way, not only as a co-researcher, but also as a scaffolder.
Yeah. I think I will. I need to learn as a scaffolder as well. I totally agree on that, and I need to learn from the things that you have, the inspiration that are given from you and from my colleagues and the analysis and data that I collect on this, because of course I have in this process learned a lot, and how could I be even better in scaffolding the teachers on this and giving them the hints of what happened and what they need to be aware of mainly, or it's very important, I think.
It also comes a bit back to your Lillian model, where I don't know if you can go back a few steps. Lillian is, of course, you use it for the action research, but it can also be used like a change model. But if you use it as a change model, it's dangerous. It comes soon.
Soon. Yeah.
Because it says like unfreeze and refreeze. It's like you know what the output is supposed to be. But can you actually, do you believe in that?
No. No, I don't believe in that. No, because I think that that's also why the ones that I have added myself is to the ones in gray, because I actually think that you need to react accordingly to what you actually figure out and how you evaluate and the data that you get and get inspired by. So I don't believe in that.
I actually think that sometimes some of the work that you're using is a little bit more strategic and maybe a little bit modernistic in its approach, whereas you are taking more of a learning and more, a more open approach to things, and sometimes it doesn't help you because it gives you a feeling of things can be more planned. But I know that you don't think it is, but then it gets a little bit confused on the way. Okay. Thank you. So that's my main issue, that you need to see these things as an implementation process, and time is very important because it takes time to develop a new practice.
Yeah.
I know you know that. Just wanted to make it more precise. Another issue is the ethical things, and you already touched upon those things. I used Facebook as a platform to integrate my students, and I must say that today I feel really bad about that. I feel really bad about using Facebook, especially because a couple of the students didn't use Facebook themselves. So is that okay?
No, I don't think so. We had the same issues. In some of the cases, there was, in the unlimited supervision where they also used the Facebook, there was, one of the guys actually said, I'm not using Facebook, so, and I won't get a profile on Facebook as well. But the majority got the choice, so they used the Facebook for this. What you could say is that when they were working in group, he could get on, but having this is quite a tough issue, I think. We were looking a bit on how to combine the Moodle environment with Facebook, because there actually is a plugin that can combine those two. But it didn't work as intended, so we couldn't make the technology work in that way, so that there was this possibility to actually have it in two media. Also, there was another female actually that came to the teacher saying, "Okay, I think this is not good because I don't have a profile either, and I think that we have some limitations in actually things only going on in the online environment, and I need you to be there in physical, and I want to talk to you on the things that we have."
But it's very funny because we try to use Facebook to include students, and then suddenly we exclude a few of them totally. But I think there's another issue around Facebook, which is not only a matter of whether the students wants to use it or not. The other thing is it's not a safe environment in the sense, or not a closed environment. And you already said that we don't have the control over the media. We don't even own the things that are published in there. I think that's a huge problem. I mean, I don't think it will get that problematic, but I think from a university perspective, I think it would be politically. I think if some people very high up starts to think about these things, maybe they should say no.
But unfortunately, we see the Facebook used more and more in many different, also here at the university.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very sad to hear that. Well, then there's another thing in relation to ethical issues, and I think that's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit also related to hype. You said 24/7. And you also have a notion on some people working digitally, but in an analog way. And I was just wondering, like, you said it was a little bit of a pity because then they're not exploiting the opportunities that are actually following from using these kind of things. But you also said that you actually met a teacher who denied to actually opening up. So what is your take on that? Because we know that a lot of people have stress. I mean, the students get stressed from being able to work all the time, and whenever they enter Facebook, they also see something new, things coming up, interesting discussions in all the different courses they're following. And teachers that are overloaded never have an hour off. So what would your recommendation be today if you were to recommend teachers to opening up, being more flexible, but where is the limit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it depends on how the teacher actually see himself or herself, because I know that some teachers are very good at using like mobile phones and doing it on the track, but we also have, I think, in general speaking, an expectations that when you send an email or when you put up things, then we have an expectation that there will be an answer, or somebody will have read it or commented on it straight away. So things are going very fast in this way of using it. So you could say that it also has to do with changing the way we actually look on expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually,
Yeah.
what we expect when we post things, and maybe there's a need for teachers to be very explicit on working hours, or do I, as a teacher, work until 10 o'clock, or what kind of task do I take on until 10 o'clock, and what kind of task do I, prohibit to, or postpone to the next day, or something like that.
So
but
you would guide the teachers to actually put up some expectations and some guidelines on
I think
what the students could expect.
I will make them very clear that it has some impact how they actually work with this.
Would you recommend any to do 24/7?
No, not at all. Okay. No. I think that we need to be
protective.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a mentality, I think, that we have, this 24/7 kind of thing.
I'm not sure. I mean, aren't we slowly getting used to, like, if you call the municipality or write the municipality, you know that you won't get an answer within 3 working days, or, I mean, there are a lot of different organizations putting up guidelines.
Yeah, we are doing the same.
We
at
just
the
need
IT
to handle
department,
it.
So I know, but yeah, but I think that the teachers also need to be aware of this.
I just need to get a time issue.
Plenty of time.
Plenty of time.
Yeah.
Good.
More than 10 minutes.
Okay. You were saying that there's some time giving and time taking issues. I would be very interested in hearing about what is the time giving issues. Because we just discussed it today. I mean, we have loads of experiences in using these kind of technologies, and we only see the time taking. So where can we actually gain some time?
Yeah, I think that it depends on, for the time giving, in my case, was the teachers actually having this expectations that he actually gained time because he didn't have that many questions. He could do the answering on the fly and these kind of things. So for him, it was giving him time. But again, digging deeper into this was actually the way of, the students didn't do what he actually intended. So he kind of left them on their own in the respect of
So it was the lack of success
Yeah.
that actually gave him more time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's not time giving as such.
Yeah.
I think that from my work, I see again it's a process before I think that you can gain time. But what I think often happens is that you higher the expectations that you get. So then the time is taken again because you want more.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you can't. It can be hard to define when time is actually given, because we do new practices and we do new processes. When we get a bit of time, we come up with something different that we would like to add, and then it's time-consuming to change the practice once again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, it did, but it didn't raise my hopes.
no.
And that's, of course, a little bit sad. It's always nice if you can have your hope raised a little bit. Yeah. I don't know if I have any more right now. No? I think I'll move on. It's okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'll bring my watch with me. Hi. I'd actually like to pick up or take off from where both Lars and Hanne finished. Because one of the things I've been reflecting upon, which is really interesting, because I found lots of very interesting things in what you were talking about. And I think it's interesting that you said to Lars at the end that the key concept within your thesis is scaffolding. Because I was actually saying to them beforehand, it kind of dominates, and it is the key concept. But I think sometimes, for me, to the exclusion of some really interesting stuff that could have been brought out. And to that extent, I thought it would be interesting to start with your research questions, if you could put those up again.
Yeah.
Seeing as it's all gone off.
Yeah.
And while you're looking for them, for the sake of everyone else, like Hanne, I actually work in, not like Hanne, I work in the Lancaster Management School, which is the bit that's not like you. But I am working currently with a lot of people across the faculty, because the Management School at Lancaster is a faculty, on a process which is intended for them to see ICT more like your transformative scaffolding, as you refer to it, in the sense of it becomes a seamless part of their practice, where we don't think of technology as something different to what we do in our teaching and learning practice. But I think it's very complicated, and I think going back to the idea of your action research, I think you could have seen everything you did as action research. When you were a scaffolder, you were doing action research. When you were talking to the students, the whole thing is an action research process. And I have a colleague, Judy Marshall at Lancaster. She's just retired, actually. And she's written an awful lot about action research. And she's written this beautiful paper called Living Life as Inquiry. And she does see her whole life as being an inquiry. And I just think that everything you were doing was an inquiry into how we move research, technology into our teaching and learning. But going back to your questions, I think your questions, for me, raised some questions. Clearly, scaffolding was already there at the very beginning, so you started with that as a concept. And when you were talking about your research analysis, you were saying that you were looking for things about scaffolding. But I think there was a lot more in your data and a lot more in your research, which I think would be interesting to look at a little bit more in the next 10, 15 minutes. But one of the things, well, there was, actually, I'll start with the second one. In your research, in my mind, the second question, one of the things that I don't see in your questions, which you might expect from me to look for, is network learning. Where is the network learning in your questions and in your research? How do you see network learning?
Yeah, I think that I see a very huge connection between the approach of problem-based learning and how you work with network learning in different ways. And I think that it's maybe, if I go to this one, I think it's giving me...
You did put it in that one.
The network learning I see as this, with these core values, I think, that are also represented in the network learning part. And I see the network learning in the problem-based learning because we actually collaborate, or the intention of collaboration is quite huge in both approaches. And I tend to believe that with these online environments that we are working on, this networking in different ways, learning from each other, constructing knowledge together, and these kind of issues is quite essential.
Yeah.
And that was why my mind came to the network learning part as well, because I see this network learning as how can I express that, more to some extent broader than problem-based learning. So in some way I see the network learning and the problem-based learning as I wouldn't say integrated in each other, but connected in different ways.
So are you suggesting possibly that problem-based learning is a type of network learning?
Yeah, I think that you could say so.
Yeah.
That's what comes to my mind.
Yeah.
The picture I get is that
Which links to the core values that you identified in your introduction.
Yeah.
So the core values that you were talking about was collaboration, sharing knowledge as constructed in interaction.
Yeah.
Which actually goes back to my other question in your research questions, which is you talk about what is the learning potential of integrating Web 2 mediated learning into problem-based learning, or we could say into network learning. It could be either, in a sense.
Yeah.
And both the core values you identified and the regular use throughout the thesis of learning potential made me think, and also similarly your regular use of the concept scaffolding made me think, what do you think learning is and what do you think learning potential is? What are you referring to in those concepts?
To me, learning will be when you actually move your knowledge in an area to add to it and reflect and gain new knowledge about or get new perspectives on where you actually started, like to add to the knowledge that you have in beforehand and do some reflection on that.
I suppose that raises the question, what do you think knowledge is? Sorry, it's getting quite complicated here.
I think that when you're talking about learning and me learning in this process of working with my thesis will be that I actually had a starting point with an assumption of different things that I wanted to look into, and I tried to collect different knowledge within the area that I thought was, or how I see the things that my starting point, and try to collect knowledge about that to gain even more knowledge on these aspects, which I need to reflect on in different ways to produce new knowledge.
See things differently.
Yeah.
Because you have two kind of processes actually thinking about it going on through the thesis linked to that process of learning. You've got the one of scaffolding, which you do link very closely to the whole Vygotskian zones of proximal, whatever it is, but also you've got the other process going on, which is around problem-based learning, network learning, core values of collaboration, sharing knowledge, knowledge construction, interaction. Do you see them as complementary or different processes of learning? Because you talk about them both, don't you? Quite strongly, actually. They're both strong in their concepts.
I'm not sure that I see them differently. I think I see them complementing each other.
I don't know the answer, by the way.
I'm just thinking about...
just made me think
because,
about it.
Yeah, I just think that I think that in the scaffolding project or process that you are dealing with some of the same issues like interaction and collaboration and having this exchange of knowledge going on, because I also see the scaffolding process as kind of action, action learning process, action research process as well.
Action research, yeah.
So therefore I don't see them differently, because I think I could put the same notions on both processes.
Yeah.
And I also think that the scaffolding process is a learning process in different ways.
Is it a learning process or a pedagogical or a teaching process? Whichever, however you want to differentiate those things.
If it's a learning process, or I didn't get this last.
Teaching, pedagogical?
I would define it as a learning process.
Yeah.
That would be my way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think that's what Vygotsky and people post-Vygotsky, including Engstrom, I guess. Yeah. I think, however, and this goes back to the common core values that you were working with around problem-based learning and network learning, and I would suggest action research. I see them as all having inquiry, collaborative, sharing knowledge construction kind of core values, and I agree with all of that. And you actually said that I think at the beginning of one of your papers, that the Aalborg problem-based learning approach was based on a critical perspective and a critical approach.
Yep.
And you talked about different metaphors of learning. And so at different points, you use the metaphor, obviously, of Safro between participation and acquisition. And there's also people who talk about dialogue and instruction. And actually, when you were talking about documentation, you talked about the students and yourself seeing the documentation being more within a concept of distribution than collaboration. And I was just thinking, actually, have you found a different kind of way of, which is very relevant to this area, of thinking about these different metaphors of learning?
I'm not. I don't.
Maybe I got it wrong in the sense of I didn't know whether you were talking about documentation. Sometimes you talked about documentation in terms, and I thought it was a really interesting kind of thing to have identified, as was the communication one, because that was the difference between writing and reading. But the documentation, it seemed that this really linked to your paper 3, which is the practice logics of Facebook and the practice logic of formal online education. And you were suggesting, I think, certainly that is what I would tend to feel, that the practice logic of formal education in online is often around collaboration, certainly on problem-based learning and network learning. But I think you were suggesting the practice logic of Facebook was more about documentation and sharing. Is that right?
Yeah, you could say that using the Facebook as well will be kind of documentation, but I also believe that using a VLE in general and setting up the writing activity supports the documentation in different ways. We really works a lot, I think, for the students to actually document what they are doing in different ways. And but I also, if I understand you right, I also see that you can do the documentation in a collaborative way, and collaborate on actually documenting these things. So I have introduced a lot of portfolios, students working in groups doing portfolios, and that's also a collaborative process. But what's in it in the end is the documentation of one's own, individual competences and skills that are being documented in different ways. So I think that the documentation could happen in a collaborative process as well.
But then you come back to the issue which you do raise around the assessment of that process.
Yeah. So, because how do you then... We often assess the products that are happening, or the documentation that we are doing, the e-portfolio that are handed in. But of course, talking about e-portfolios should illustrate a process in different ways. So I think that we maybe also need to look at the process of getting to evaluate on the process of actually getting to the results, the product, the documentation that are done in these ways, and the dialogue that are going on.
How would you go about that, do you think?
I think that could be a hard process, because I actually think that stresses some other issues. Because I have seen lots of experiments going on here at the university, and you as a teacher often get different... The students are working in many different environments and working with many different media, like the Google Docs, the Facebook, and Dropbox, and all of these the Moodle environment. And what will be the one where you as a teacher needs to be present? Because are you as a teacher going to collect all the processes going on in all the other different media that the students actually are using to make them, to evaluate on that? And I think that raises another issue.
It does.
Which I haven't thought through, but I think that we see it more and more.
Yeah. It also raises the issue, does it not, of does the teacher always have to be present?
Yeah.
Because we're not always present. We haven't always been present in face-to-face teaching.
No.
In fact, there's the whole issue of how, going back to Hanne's point, learners and teachers are having to change their concepts of what it is we do in a digital world of learning and teaching.
But I think also asking the students, how can we ask the students to document the process and still have a product in the end in one way, without have to go around all the tools that they are using.
If I could ask a similar question, not quite the same question as Lars, going back to where was the network learning, which I think you addressed perfectly good. What do you think, from the work that you've done, is your main important contribution to the field of network learning?
I think that due to network learning in specific, it's, yeah, good question.
That's a bit tough, but you know, it's the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got one last question after that. It's much easier.
Well, I think that my contribution to the network learning is that we really need, as teachers, to be aware of all the possibilities that we have gained with this technology that are present at the moment, and I think that we need to we are how can I say it? We need to teach and learn the students to behave in this digital world and global environment that are, in some sense, getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And it's done that for years. But actually behaving in this networked learning environment and gain from each other. I think that's what that's how I see one of the things that
How
are
it's
important.
come out from your own research here, because the final question that I would like to ask is, what for you, as a practitioner in this field, as well as a researcher, an action researcher even, because as I said at the beginning, I think action research, I have a colleague who lives their life as an action researcher. So what for you are the insights that you take away from this research, from your own everyday practice perspective?
I take the approach of actually that I would like to do even more action research and actually be the person scaffolding the teachers in using our virtual learning environment even more than they actually are doing. And I think that that it's. I still think and believe that it's an important issue to actually do this, and using my experience and my work with the environment and my knowledge about these Web 2.0 tools and my interests of research to actually be this technological, pedagogical expert in
Well, I actually think, to be perfectly honest, people like you are going to be incredibly significant in all of this, because I don't think myself that the academic can be expected to do all those things on their own. And it is going to be an interaction between people who have the pedagogical technical skills and people who have the knowledge domain and pedagogical skills as well. You both have pedagogical. I have pedagogical, you have pedagogical. But we each bring different things. And neither one of us can be... No, but I mean, I get so confused, frustrated with this idea that academics can do everything. So I think it'll be very important that, A, people like yourself do this kind of research and bring it into the practice of the academic teachers.
I would like to.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you. Now it's time for the questions from the audience.
Okay.
Yes. Isn't
Listen,
it? Relax.
I'll better take this one.
So far, so good. Afterwards, there will be a small reception hosted by the department. I think it's going to be next door outside. We'll see about that. Probably
next door, I think.
But now the committee will go somewhere to talk about what they've heard today. and then we will wait for their return. Thank you. So, Lars?
Yes, as chairman of the assessment committee, we have had a thorough discussion after your presentation and our discussions with you, and we would like to say congratulations. We think that you made an interesting presentation, developing further and presenting a framing of your analysis, and that you entered into a good discussion and dialogue with us on our different kind of challenges and questions that we pose to you, so that we will recommend to the university that you will be awarded the PhD.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations.
And then, as I said before, there's a reception next door.
Tak. Og tak for hjælp. Tak. Så vi kan lige snakke om alt det andet bag. Thank you. Tak. Ja. Ja. Det er